So this is only slightly nerve-wracking, sharing a stage with you. Um, yeah, it's a real privilege, and I think just with such an amazing testament with seeing what an incredible turnout there was today to see the recently restored copy of Killer of Sheep. I was blown away. I mean, Philly showed up. That was really impressive and great to see. And same thing right now. I mean, I think everybody's eager to hear you speak. We met, I approached you in 2019 to work with me on a film that I was making for the Museum of Modern Art that dealt with architecture and blackness. And for me, thinking about those two ideas together was it was a difficult thing to kind of wrap my head around. But you know, one of the ways that I felt that blackness was best expressed in terms of the occupation of space was through cinema. And one of the best expressions of black occupation of space is Killer of Sheep. And you agreed to work with me and narrate and share your experiences of growing up in Watts, and also giving insights in terms of stories behind both making the film and your creative process. And you know, what I thought was originally going to be a kind of a typological analysis of the architectural spaces of Watts became something much deeper and more meaningful as you kind of shared really beautiful and personal anecdotes of your experience both growing up in the city and how that experience informed the very real stories of making the film. And it was such a beautiful reminder today, after having made the film in Watts, to go back and then see and recognize certain ideas and spaces in almost a kind of nostalgic way. And I know that we agreed when we initially talked about a week ago that we would try and talk about other films in your oeuvre, which I think is really important. But I just wanted to give you an opportunity and the audience an opportunity to perhaps hear one or two of those anecdotes. Specifically, I remember the wonderful story you told me about the scene in the house when they're purchasing the engine, and how that's actually an aggregation of a few different memories that you had. Do you mind telling us a little bit about what went into that scene?
I'll certainly try. Excuse me. It's been a long time ago, but I remember that scene well because it was so unusual. Because all the people in the film, basically, I grew up with, basically. And in this particular case, a friend of mine lived. You know, I didn't live actually in Watts. I lived about a mile away from Watts, but this guy lived like 3 blocks away, and he was related to some friends I knew, and so I visited him one day, and he had the front end of a car in his house, you know, and it was very peculiar because you know you don't meet people who have half of a car sitting in the front room, and so I asked him, I said, well, what is this? And he said, this is my car, in front of my car. I said, well, why do you have it in your front room? He said, because if I have it outside, someone would steal it, you know, which makes plenty sense because that would have happened. So anyway, in fact, he's the one who's actually in the film, who's sitting with the person who said, I had more things to think about because my hair is falling out, and the lady sitting next to him, and he was a guy with his foot on the chair, picking his toes or something, and he says hi, you know, really loud, overacting, and so it was his house I went to, and he did that, but also and you saw this guy on the floor with his bandage. That was another incident where this guy lived next to a house that was it was like a collection of tightly knit apartments, and if you step out of one door, you can just trip and fall into the next door because it's so close like that. And one night he was trying to get some sleep, and there was a party going on next door, and he went next door to tell these people, would you mind quieting it down? And before he knew it, someone hit him in the head with a tire, and he fell back into it, and that's the guy he saw laying on the floor. And this same house where this all happened was a place where I went one evening, and these three guys came into the apartment, and they sort of knew who was there and everything, and they had these guns that they had just found or stolen or something, and there was a Bank of America on Manchester and Broadway, and there was a shootout between these guys and the police and the sheriff, and the sheriff was killed. And it was really an unusual experience because at that time, you didn't hear about policemen getting killed. And they were like invincible. And it was so rare. And because, it was a time when, if it was a gang of kids a young man on the corner, and someone yelled, "Police!" everyone would scatter. But after this police was killed, this officer, no one moved anywhere. It was like this revelation of they can get killed too. I remember having this strange feeling of this. It was a bizarre thing of being liberated to some extent. I know it's weird to think when someone was killed and you have this feeling of being liberated, but the police were so oppressive. I would walk to the store. I would go to the theater or whatever it is, and walking alone. And the police would stop me and search me thoroughly. Look through the seams through my pants or coat, whatever it is. And if they found one seed of marijuana, I was going to jail, So, and they would call me all kind of names, And I was a teenager, and I wasn't into anything, anything criminal. But that's the way they took all of us, And so, when this particular sheriff was killed, it was like, well, there was a weight off your shoulder, and it's a weird feeling, but that's the irony of making films like this, And so that was, I look back at those days, and I had to search my feelings and to sort of rationalize and justify why I felt that way. I didn't accept it, but we all felt that way, because Chief Parker, who was the chief at the time, had hired Southerners to police South Central. And his quote was that they knew how to handle black people, And so you had incidences like the Deadweiler case, where a young man was killed unnecessarily, and you were loved the same way. They just had open city. They had a license to do whatever they want. So that was, and I wanted to make a film that sort of talked about the surreal quality of that, and the irony and so forth. And so that's how it sort of came out, trying to find a way to tell this story that had all these complex themes and concerns.
Thank you. Chester Himes, the African-American crime fiction writer, as well as other genres as well. He uses a similar process in his writing. He worked in Paris for a good chunk of his mature life, but he would return to the United States occasionally. And one time when he was out of money, he worked as a porter at an automat. And he witnessed a scene of police brutality when a policeman drunk kind of stormed in and accused the waiters of stealing his car. That made its way into a major plot point in his novel, Run, Man, Run. So similarly, using these kind of personal experiences, ways of seeing and understanding the world, channeling that, and then feeding it back into your work. I'm curious, like in the case of another film which has been recently restored and re-released, Annihilation of Fish. You didn't write that piece, but you directed the script. How was there an occasion in your interpretation of the script and in shooting to weave those life experiences into the telling of the story?
Well, that's what you're there for, really, to bring your sensibilities and your experience to give the story your, you know, like your hand in it, you know, your experience. And I mean, actors do the same thing. They just don't read the script. They bring their experience to it and how they see it. And that's where, in terms of acting, a lot of conflict comes, because, you know, you have method actors, you have other actors do different things, and they approach the work in a very unique way that's theirs. You know, they interpret the story, and sometimes it runs into conflict with other actors who have different methods of arriving at the same scene. You know, and then you have this fusion and all sorts of madness and everything. So it's a difficult thing working with actors. It's a difficult thing working with anybody, period, but particularly actors. You know, and other people in the business, mostly in the business. You know, everyone wants to express and dominate, you know, and you get into some of the weirdest confrontational fights and so forth. And so that's why I never really judge a filmmaker, because I mean, I don't know how many wars he's been through. You know, I can tell you about things that just, you know, you want to walk away at a certain point. You say, no, this isn't worth it, you know, the stress and everything. And so I've had a lot of friends who just stopped working altogether and just refused to work with certain people and certain conditions, because it's madness, you know. It's chaos, and you have to make sense out of it.
It was something new for me, both seeing the film today on a large screen, but also having the sound restored. I was perhaps more acutely aware of the precision of your sound design and your use of effects and non-diegetic sound. Specifically, some of the earlier scenes of the slaughterhouse, where it almost feels as though we're hearing a kettle kind of about ready to boil over. Can you talk about some of the decisions you made in terms of the sound design, and perhaps using that scene as a kind of starting point?
Yeah, well, one of the things I wanted to do, and a lot of us in the film department during that time, we were trying to bring filmmaking to the community, to show them how easy it could be done. And in this particular film, I wanted kids to get involved in it. So kids worked on the sound. They did everything normal production would do. They had, you know, it's something very easy to learn. But when the studios come to the community, you know, they make it like, oh, it's this thing that you never understand, you know. And I know kids, we wanted them to have a hands-on experience. And so kids did the sound, and I wasn't worried about, you know, the technical quality of it, because I wanted them to learn. So it was a teaching experience. And, you know, we had kids that were like young teenagers, like 12, 13, or something like that, working with an Nagra 4. An Nagra 4 was one of the, at the time, a very sophisticated sound recorder, you know. And they did that. We said, if you can turn a hi-fi on, you can work a Nagra 4, you know. I mean, and because, you know, the idea is to keep you away from it, so you don't compete with them. And so the jobs will always stay in certain people's hands, you know. I remember, you know, I did a number of films, and I was going through this park in my neighborhood, and there was a film production going on. And so, nosy as I am, I rolled my back up and I asked, you know, in a friendly way, well, what's in this film? Who's in it? And the guy looked at me and said, you wouldn't understand, you know. And I didn't argue with him, and I just thinking and backed away. You know, but this is the kind of attitude people, young kids experience talking to people from the studios. They didn't want you to, they didn't have time for you and things like that. They called you, like, they used the word bogeys or something like that, you know. And I made it in my production. You don't call people in the community that, you know. They allow you to come in and you treat them like that. No, you don't do that on my film. And you have to find, you know, I don't want to jump around, but you have to, as a director, you have to put standards out there and say, you treat people in the neighborhood like they're human beings, and don't call them anything except for people, whatever it is, or their names. And so you find, as a director of color, you have these additional struggles and fights to deal with. Not only working with actors and things and all the other chaos, but you have to see that people of color are treated well. They have opportunities that you make sure you have to fight for them to work in certain job areas. I can tell you some stories about, I don't want to go off on job things, but the jobs I fought for people of color who had experience. It's like things you don't want to do. It's like time spent on things that you don't need to be, but you do, because if you don't do that, these people wouldn't work, And so you're the ones who make it get possible for other people of color to work on films. And that's a part of the ethics and who you are as a director and what you should be.
Thank you. And perhaps staying on that theme of kind of generosity, I think it also expresses itself in your storytelling, how you approach filmmaking and ask both difficult and insightful questions about your role as a filmmaker. I'm thinking specifically about the Nat Turner documentary that you made. And for those of you who haven't seen it, it's a documentary that's largely reenactments and then interviews with a number of people close to that story. So either historians or authors or actors that might have come into contact and worked in terms of telling that story. And the film takes a weird and beautiful kind of detour about 3/4 of the way into it, where it gets meta all of a sudden, and you're introduced, and the producer is introduced, and you actually talk about the role of storytelling, and what does it mean, the Nat Turner story, the confessions of Nat Turner, were originally told by a white lawyer, and then another white historian took up that story in the 70s and retold it. But in each case, you use the opportunity of your role as a storyteller to talk about how the power of storytelling and the power of truth is stolen from Black folks, and the importance of thinking really critically about what does it mean to be able to tell your own story.
Yeah, that was a very difficult story in many ways. First of all, how I got involved in it was Frank Christopher was a student at UCLA at the same time I was. And he had made some really wonderful documentaries and political films about what was happening in El Salvador, some really, really poignant and violent stories that took place there. And I had did Nightjohn, a story about a girl who learns how to read from a slave named Nightjohn, who escaped, and he comes back, and his function and job is to teach other slaves how to read, which was a very dangerous occupation because you can be brutalized and mutilated and hung and lynched and so forth. But he teaches this girl named Sarni. It's based on Gary Paulson's a young adult novel that got a number of awards because of the nature of his writing and so forth. And it's a very interesting film because it tells you why people should learn how to read and why it was kept from them, and what the cost they had to pay if they were caught, So the film I did, The Nightjohn, was a distortion of that. It wasn't true. Really a wonderful writer, this Jesuit writer, Bill Kane, wrote the script. And he had a lot of resources and things like that. And there was a person, I think, in history named Nightjohn or something. But anyway, he takes this character and embellishes him and makes him this heroic character and a tragic figure to some extent. And so we had started off, wanted to make let me start over here. Frank Christopher saw the film I did and said, you were wrong in your interpretation of Nat Turner. Well, it was the girl's point of view. She was learning how to read, and she was faking and telling a story that was part of her imagination as opposed to real life and truth. And she said that Nat Turner rebellion was a success, and it wasn't, you know. And so anyway, so that was in the film I did, you know, but it was written by Bill Kane. But we had started off and wanted to do the real story of Nat Turner, you know, and we took a lot from oral history. We interviewed a lot of the people who were there at the time, whose parents were involved in the rebellion. And it was Nat Turner who wrote the Confessions of Nat. It was William Styron, excuse me, who wrote the Confessions of Nat Turner. And Fox Studios was going to make a film out of it, and James Earl Jones was going to be involved in it, and some other people like that. And they had interviewed a lot of the people in Southampton, where the story takes place. And but what happened was Tom Wolfe was a reporter and a storyteller as well, and he had interviewed a lot of people, the same people we interviewed after he did. And he had got a lot of personal information from these people. And they said, okay, and he had promised them that he wouldn't publish it. But he did. He published all their secrets and things, and you know, it's a small knit community. And so it caused a lot of friction between the people in the community. Nat Turner's relatives still live there, you know, and they still feel like, they still feel threatened. They're still fighting the war, you know, and the people who live there too, the Francis and I can't remember the people's name now, but we interviewed them. At first, it was very open to do it, but then when Tom Wolfe exposed everybody, they said, no, you reporters and filmmakers we don't want to talk to you. So we were stuck. We had a story that we wanted to do. In fact, we wanted to be like, in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation and thing. We tried to get the families together to have this dialogue. We're going to film it. And when they found out that we were a part of this crew, the media, they didn't trust anybody. So they said, no, you can't do that, go somewhere else. And so we were stuck with that idea, and said, what are we going to do? So we had to go to a retreat and figure out what story can we tell. But what happened was, because there's all these different versions of Nat Turner, most of them were most of the stories that they wanted to do was taken from William Styron's book, which was a distortion of Nat Turner, completely. Complete distortion. But the studios wanted to do it, and the people of Southampton wanted to do it because they were going to benefit from making the film and make money off of it. And they had already started to build a museum with Nat Turner's, you know, Bible, the rope that hung him, and all this stuff like that, you know. And so when we went, we had to find a different story. And what we found was there's all these different interpretations of Nat Turner, but mostly by the things that were written. And the things that are written are considered like, what's the word? Like it's credible. It's like it's scholarly. But we were saying that there's this audio. There's this written history.
Oral history.
Yeah, oral history of it. And but PBS and these other scholars and educationists didn't want to accept that. They said no, you know, it has to be written. But all that written stuff was distorted. It was like when they wrote about Reconstruction, and they had all this wrong information about it. It took W.E.B. Du Bois's writing of it and research to correct them, you know. And so our situation was we had to come up with a different story, but we found that everyone wanted to do their interpretation of Nat Turner. And the studios and PBS and all these things wanted to do William Styron's book, not about Nat Turner, the real Nat Turner, but William Styron. And we said we can't do that. But we looked at all these other things, Harriet Beecher Stowe's version of it, and these other people in the background who had written something about it. But we wanted to get the oral history of it because that we felt was more accurate. You know, people who it was handed down from generation to generation, you know, but they wouldn't accept that. So we had to come up with trying to find all these different interpretations, and we did that, and then we found that our voices wasn't heard, you know, and we wanted to sort of consolidate all these things and say, this is what you should probably look at as being the real Nat Turner, or a close facsimile of what he had experienced. So we had to go all these different circles, and I had to come in there, and some of the other writers and filmmakers, to tell our point of view of what was needed. And so it was always a political thing, and we do films of people of color. You know, you just can't do it. You know, you have to find a deviant way of going around and telling the story, to be accurate, to be fair, and you feel comfortable doing it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, can I say one more about this? And I probably quit on it. You know, when I went to the museum in Southampton, where this couple who had all the artifacts of Nat Turner, supposedly, the rope that hung him and everything, and the sword. Now, I'm the only black guy in this, you know, thing, visiting these people. And so these two elderly ladies had Nat Turner's sword, you know, and so they came up to me and says, sort of standing off at a distance and holding the sword, you know, like it was this thing, and they said, "Do you want to see the sword?" And I said, "Yeah," you know, and so they reluctantly gave it to me to hold. And they were very careful to watch me. I sort of felt they thought I was going to make this transformation, become Nat Turner or something, you know, because they were just that worried, you know. And so, you know, I knew that, and I sort of played on it, you know. I started to move about, you know, like, and they were like studying me and all this stuff. But I had fun watching them, you know. But anyway, that was my revenge, so to speak. Anyway.
Thank you for that. Just a note, several of Charles's films are available to stream on Amazon, and I refreshed myself by watching Annihilation of Fish, To Sleep with Anger, and the Nat Turner Archive, which actually streams for free. You don't have to rent it. So if you haven't seen any of the films that we're talking about, I encourage you all to go and watch them. The next one I want to talk about is probably your most kind of conventional Hollywood film, I would say, which is The Glass Shield. And you're looking up is...
Oh, it's the skyline. That's interesting. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I just noticed it.
So that's, you know, in watching that film, you know, it's interesting. Like, there's Elliot Gould plays a minor part in the film, and it's a police procedural that kind of shifts into a kind of noir film at some point. And in fact, I was really reminded of The Long Goodbye, you know, that stars Elliot Gould. You know, it was produced by Miramax, and so it had, I think, a broader release. But one of the things that I've noticed in your films is how they intersect with history. And so we just talked about Nat Turner and how the work, but also how the characters seem to, in some ways, kind of float free from a specific moment or era. That's especially true in Annihilation of Fish, where James Earl Jones and Lynn Redgrave seem almost like ghosts that haunt the present. You know, the music that they listen to, their dress, the way they move through the city of Los Angeles, only really interacting with each other, not with either the city or the other people. But I was thinking about the time that you made The Glass Shield, and wondering, you know, it came a year or two after the Rodney King verdict. And clearly those tensions are being expressed within the narrative. And so I'm wondering, how do you process history and kind of weave it into, what influence does it have in terms of your writing?
Well, a lot, because this was based on a true character named JohnAdy Johnson. And he was stationed at the Signal Hill Police Station or sheriff station. It's an area between Los Angeles and Long Beach, and it was known for its racism and against anyone with long hair, black people of color, or whatever it is. They just it was known fact that if you drove down there, if you didn't look, normal, and that normal mean a white, conservative, whatever, you were stopped. And there was a young football player. I'm sorry, his name escapes me at the moment. But anyway, he was a young guy who was killed by the police, by the Signal Hill Police Department, and so it was like he hung himself supposedly, but there was evidence that showed that it didn't happen. There was a frame. The police in L.A. and California, there were these rogue police officers that happened in the sheriff's department in East Los Angeles, where in order to be a member of that department, you had to kill somebody. And that was your way in. And anyway, so you had these in the valley as well as the rogue cops, and you can read about them. They still exist to some extent. And this newspaper with this news commentator, Baxter Ward, who was a famous news person, who kept preaching in his nightly news about these rogue police who were victimizing people. And anyway, so what the Signal Hill Police Department did was they hired the first black person named John Eddie Johnson. And he sort of was curious, and he looked into this young man, I keep trying to think of his name, his death. And he found that it didn't sit well. There was a lot of discrepancies about him. And he was warned from some people who weren't as problematic and racist that tell him, you need to leave here. And they end up saving him by bringing a false charge against him so he can be fired. And that's what saved him. And so there was Chet Walker, who was a famous basketball player for the Chicago Bulls. He was listed as one of the great players of all times. He was a producer. He quit playing baseball, and he had found this script and this writer it was going to be a TV show. And Chet came to me and said, "Look, I got this story. Would you be interested?" I said, "Yeah." So I read it, and it was because it was written for television. It was very, very flat and one-dimensional. And so I said, "Do you have an opportunity to say something?" And so he let me rewrite it, and so I did, and so we made it more, involved it more, and conflicting and all these police and where he had, two things I wanted to do: tell the story of John Eddie Johnson. And what happened to this kid, but also show how easy it is to be compromised, because we're doing the police story now, and if you ever want to understand the police department, go on a ride along with them. It is like riding in a roller coaster ride with no railings. It is just that emotional. I went on a full moon on Friday night, and that's the worst time you could go on a police thing, because you run into shootings, you run a kid being shot right in front of you, you run into running down the alley trying to catch the guys and stuff, and you pray for the morning to come, because that's when you're released. And they went to a shooting with the police and someone in there, and the police we were with, there was the head of the department at the night. Whatever you call him, staff sergeant, something. Anyway, so we drive down the street into the traffic, trying to get to where these police are under fire, going, and then you're gonna drive in between where the fire is and the shooting is in, and you're sitting in the car saying, "Now why am I here?" And you don't sign any kind of papers to give you insurance or anything. You're just in it. You're stuck with it. So anyway. If you want to know more about the police, how dangerous it is, and what they have to face every night, be a policeman. You understand how they become violent and how they become corrupt. And it is I mean, you have a different opinion of. I had, I came up being abused by police, being called all kind of racist names you can think of, But having gone through what they've gone through, they don't get a break. You go night after night into this fire, And when I got done, I had weeks to come down off that high, I said I'd never do this again, But it's just that dramatic. But anyway, so we wanted to do show the police how a young recruit can get easily compromised by trying to do the wrong thing, by just telling a little white lie, and that is the thing that's his downfall. He wants to be a part of the police because you have to be a member of the police department in order to survive. You can't be a person who's going to break the code of silence. And they are encouraged to do wrong. They're encouraged to lie, for the prosecution and so forth. And they're rewarded for it. And so they start getting further and further and crossing the boundaries instead of what they promised. But most of them start off wanting to be honorable heroes, Most of them start off talking about, I wanted to save people, I want to do this. They end up getting compromised and robbing people and stuff like that and killing people. Not all of them do it like that, but it's in the background. And it's an institution. They tell them, your job is to come back alive, period. Your job is to back up your partner. And that's it. I don't care whatever happens, you come back, and whatever tale you tell to save you, you do it, And they support you. And the prosecutors, the judge, and everyone is behind it. So it's the whole system is corrupt. But anyway, did I tell you, sorry? Yeah. I'm sorry, I get to go off, huh?
I'm enjoying myself. I hope everybody else is.
No.
Perhaps staying on that theme in that film, and specifically this notion of violence and the kind of ever-present threat. What was unique about your approach in making that film was not to satisfy the spectacle of violence. One of the most kind of violent moments in the film is the beating of Lori Petty's character, which you don't show.
Yeah.
You simply show her in the hospital bed afterwards being visited. And I thought that was a remarkable choice, not to turn it into a kind of, as I said, spectacle.
Yeah. You have to be, it's a very violent job to do. And like we went to a killing of a young kid we went from a stabbing of a guy being stabbed in the rear end to this going between gunfire, and so so we went to this kid who had just gotten shot in the chest, a young guy, and we drove up, and first we tried to chase the car that supposedly the killer was in the car, and it was too far ahead of us, and we couldn't catch him, and this Ford, the police Ford, I really respected those cars then because that guy put that car through its paces. I mean, we went forward as fast as he can go, and then he realized that the guy had ran through the alley the other way, and so he threw it in gear, and the car just wheels are bouncing up like that. And I'm saying, boy, this has a transmission in it because it was like holding up, you know. And I come to respect Fords. I said, I'm gonna get a Ford after that. But anyway, so we went back to the kid. The kid was lying stretched out, and he was covered with a blanket. And so there's all these cops standing around joking, you know, and they saw my face. You know, I was really unhappy with. There's this case where this kid was lying dead. He'd just been shot. His mother was trying to get through the yellow tape, and they were holding her back, and she was just crying and hysterical. And so the cops was looking at me, and at first he wanted me to come over and look at the body, you know, and I said, no, look at the body. And so they want to see your reaction to violence and this sort of thing. They want to see how you can break down. And he said, no, come on, see it. And I said, no, I don't want to see it, and I was arguing back and forth. And then they were laughing at something, and so they saw my reaction, and the cops said, this is how we react to certain things. This is how we deal with it, like trying to justify and saying this is a byproduct of living in this violent situation. And we have to, in order to survive, we have to take, this absurd way of dealing with it, and so that was, what I saw what they were trying to do, it put me in a situation where I would break down, and psychologically, and so that was the worst part of it, But the worst part, I mean, seeing the mother of this kid who the tragedy, and you don't want to, there's things you don't want to see. You can't unsee them once you do.
Thank you. I want to perhaps open it up to the audience if you're okay with that. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for Charles? We have a gentleman over there.
Who are some of your influences?
How can I say this? I would say my neighbors for one thing, and the men. I used to work in a limited way in the summer with my friend's father. The guy who played a soldier, his father in the film Killer Sheep was a plasterer. And then in the summertime, I would go with them to help with these houses, clean the houses. I always wanted I respected these carpenters and masonry people and things like that, because there were these men that were wearing these white overalls, and they had arms, really muscular and big veins running down, the arm. And I was this kind of puny kid, and I always wanted to be bigger. I wanted to play football and be boxer, all this kind of stuff. And so I always looked at these guys, they would go and I don't know if you know what the cement mixer is. They would feed that thing full of sand, and I was trying to do that you had to keep it going, and I was one summer trying to shovel that stuff into this mixer, and that stuff's hard, man. You be trying to do that stuff and you don't have any muscles or anything like that. You have to work, and so these guys would do that, and they would get a bottle of Old Granddad, and that's what be the only thing to keep them going, And I just didn't have, and I've always admired those guys. And one of the things that they said was very interesting to me, and older men would, they would always say to you, son, stay in school,
Good afternoon, Mr. Burnett. Thank you very much for being here, and special thanks to the BlackStar team for making this happen. I'm right here, to your left, sir.
Oh, way over there.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
You said over there, but way over there. Okay.
Yes. So you both spent some time talking about Nat Turner, or Troublesome Property, and the way it goes back and forth between fiction and documentary. There's another film that you've made that does that. It was part of the Blues series produced by Martin Scorsese, Warming by the Devil's Fire, and I was wondering if you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I heard this preacher saying, and one of the phrases he used he was this guy with this rough voice, and he was fire and brimstone kind of preacher, I suppose, and he was saying, with this hoarse voice, and warming by the devil's fire, he was just, this old church. You can see him in this old church, probably near the levee or something like that, and with crocodiles running in the river, whatever, and these people sitting at the black, church with these hats on, and women applauding and so forth like that, and he's preaching. And he uses the term "woman by the devil's fire." And I remember I had to go back to Mississippi. Most of the kids in L.A. were born in the South or something like that, Texas, Arkansas, you name it. And it was a habit of sending these kids back south in the summertime. They had to pick cotton, they go to church or get saved and all this kind of stuff. But I had to go back because my uncle was a preacher, and my cousin was a preacher, a very famous preacher, and so my grandmother was very much in the church, and so she wanted us to be saved, and so my brother went back to Mississippi and sat on the mourner's bench to a day and night and weeks in and it saved us from picking cotton, but we had this. The other choice was being in church all day, because he was one of these preachers that they would go to one church in the morning and they go to another one. It was like this traveling thing all over, and but we had to do that, and so I kind of understood what the Woman by the Devil's Fountain, what kind of preacher that was, and so in the blues, because I used to play a trumpet. And my grandmother and my mother liked the blues and everything like that, but I used to play St. Louis blues and all that stuff. I used to try to play it on my trumpet, and actually I was a very good trumpet player. But anyway, we had to do this sort of thing and go to church, and that was my experience in this hot sun with the mosquitoes picking at you and stuff like that. So I was a city boy, more or less. I confess to it. I'm ashamed of it. I mean, people thought, like own up to it. You pick out. No, I didn't. So. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hey, Mr. Oh, I'll go over. All right, sounds good.
Okay, yes, sir.
Hey, Mr. Burnett, thank you so much for giving this time and these anecdotes. I guess I have a question about, hearing you talk about riding with the police officers. It just showed me how much empathy you have, just to kind of get a more 360 perspective on, something that may have been harmful in your past or just as a collective. So I'm curious about how you're cultivating this empathy. Is it the filmmaking that helps you do that? Do you think it's an innate thing, or is it something that you're cultivating constantly? I'm just curious about empathy in that way.
Well, I think you have to be objective and look at people as very complex and human in a way. I mean, there's some things that are certainly questionable that we do all the time, and throughout history. And it seems like we can't get above that. And so I go back and forth. As a filmmaker, you're supposed to have empathy for the subject, particularly for the character and stuff like that. And you have to find, the ambiguities and stuff like that. But still, you have to we're all human, and human takes so many forms. The things that we do. And I was, mass murder is nothing new, and stuff like that, and how they do that stuff, and how they do it what they did in the past, it was just horrible. You talk about things that happened during the World War II and the Holocaust and all that stuff like that. Human beings were sacrificed. I mean, what I question is the leadership, who runs the country and stuff like that. I have an issue with. Thank you. I'm sorry, who's?
Hello, Mr.
Hello.
Burnett.
Hello.
I wanted to affirm
I'm just breaking up everything here.
It's okay.
Sorry about that.
I wanted to affirm, I work in public media, and I deeply struggle with the fact-checking process. I'm writing stories about African history, Black history, and I want to say that today, Indigenous people and Black people are directly pushing against the idea of written history being more important than oral history. So your struggle actually has directly impacted and helped my job. So I wanted to thank you for that. Two, I wanted to ask you, I noticed so much crosstalk, and it felt like improvisation. in the language of the children in Killer of Sheep, or in a lot of the actors and actresses, how much of your directing relies on sticking to the script versus allowing the actors, especially the young actors, to improv their answers and responses while you're on set?
Interesting question. I tell you, one of the things I had to try to not do too much improvisation, because it was this thing of wasting film and time. And you wanted to storyboard as much as you can, and in fact it was. And one of the things I tried to do, as opposed to using professional actors, which had their advantage, and non-actors, which you typecast. And you typecast because they look like the characters, they act like the characters, they are the characters, so you don't have to sort of pull anything out of them, you know. But when you have professional actors, if something goes wrong, you can make adjustments right away, and they can give it to you right away. And so that's why professionally it's best to use a professional actor. But then sometimes you can get some really good stuff from non-actors, but you have to work at it, you know. So it's a time factor that's involved, and you know, everything is about money and time. And so, you know, if you try to make a film, they want you to have all professional people on every level, you know, who made films before, because it's insurance against that the film is going to be made. But I mean, I learned a lot by just using the non-actors, particularly girls and boys. But one of the things that I had problems with somewhat is, like, young girls don't like boys their age. And same way with boys, they don't like girls their age, but they like older boys and older girls, you know. And we had these scenes where we had the girls and boys supposed to fight, you know, things like that. I didn't have to encourage them. They just put them in the room together. They're gonna do it, you know. You have to pull them apart. Get your hands off this person, you know. That's what. But this one of the scenes I learned, and it happened quite soon, and I benefited from it, was I had this notion that girls, I mean not girls necessarily, but kids can't understand really complex emotions, you know. And so I was telling this little girl who was getting water at the sink and looking at her parents, you know, and she was this jealous thing between her mother and the father and all this sort of thing. And so she was getting water from the faucet, but she wasn't doing it the way I wanted her to do it. So she was supposed to drink the water and had this look on her face, and like daring look, so to speak. And so I went up to her and I said, excuse me, let me get up here. I went up to her and I said, you know, I want you to do this and look this way and whatever it is, and, you know, make eye contact. And so she tried to say, no, you do this, no, and do this, you know. And I kept telling her, she kept doing it wrong. And then I realized what she was doing was I was telling her to do this and get down, trying to get down to her size. And she was thinking I meant for her to get down there, and kept doing this. No, you have to get, you know. And then I realized that I was making her get the wrong impression what I wanted. And so I just said, no, this is what she's supposed to be thinking. And she did it just like that. And all you have to do is just tell them emotionally what they're supposed to do. And they know. And one of the things about kids is they know more than what the adults do. They know their lines and know what the adults do, and they can direct the movie, you know. But yeah, so you learn. But in all fairness, this is the first time I ever worked with all these different variety of people and kids and things like that. So it was a learning experience for me as well. But I never forgot that, you know. And from that moment on, I always treated kids as that they were adults, you know, and that they understood really complex emotions. And we worked, and it worked. Yeah, I hope that's, yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
Hey.
Oh.
Yes. Yeah, right in front. Also wanted to ask a little bit about Killer of Sheep.
Yeah.
As I was rewatching it, it struck me how much Stan was able to be kind of affectionate to everyone but his wife. And watching her, like, kind of try to get, you know, his attention in a lot of different ways, I guess I was curious about her reaction to it, because I felt like she was, very empathetic towards him and understanding. But especially the scene where they're on the porch and like one of the guys like grabs her arm and he doesn't say anything to defend her, stuff like that. I was curious why she, more just like motivation of her character, why she didn't express more anger towards him and, and why he was unable to be affectionate.
Well, what I wanted to do was to have a woman who understood his problems and did everything to make the marriage work. The thing was that he had a job. I wanted to find a job for him that would create this alienation, this distancing, these nightmares. Being struggling for money and living in that environment was enough. But then having a job like killing sheep, which is ironic in a way because you have to kill something to survive, and so that created this distance between him and his wife, where he couldn't feel anymore. And so I wanted that, and I wanted, in contrast, a woman who doesn't throw up her arms and fists and start doing crazy things, but one who's trying desperately to make the marriage work. And I give her credit for that. Not just I'm going to divorce and find somebody else. No, she was going to make the family work. I mean, and so that was the relationship I wanted for her to have. It was a sacrifice for her, but it was a human one. She loved her husband, and it showed it through her resistance and wanting to stay in the relationship and do everything to make it possible. And the little girl, one of the things too, which was interesting, was that dynamics, because little girls have this relationship with their fathers that the boys don't have, to some extent. And like if the boys I knew in a family like that, they would always ask their sister to do something, ask your father this or that, because he'll do this for you, not for. And so that kind of relationship exists, a lot. And so I wanted to show those themes and that structure, whereas. I've known a lot of families like that where the boys did that. And there's one thing I wanted to comment on, because every time I see it, it bothers me, because I don't know if I overacted, was when when her brother pours his sugar in the bowl, and endless, Well, I know kids used to be, particularly kids that didn't have too much, they used to make these sugar sandwiches. They used to get this white bread and pour the sugar all over this, and then eat it and be crunching that stuff. That was prime for diabetes. It's like that would I know most kids would do that sort of thing, and that's the worst kind of sandwich you can make, I think. But anyway.
Thank you so much,
My
Charles. Thank you so much for your generosity and for everybody for coming out. Yes, let's give him a last round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.